And it begins in chapter 3, now the serpent. So as we get into the fall, and again, turning points. One of my favorite TV preachers and radio preachers, used to on the radio before he was on TV, was David Jeremiah. The name of his program is Turning Points. And I don't know what his intro is anymore. I usually don't tune it in soon enough to get the intro. But he used to say, in everyone's life there are turning points. And we're at a turning point. And oftentimes those turning points will bring us to a point of no return. You know, sometimes once it's done, and it can't be undone. And everyone pretty much wants a do-over. I mean, is there anything in the last week that if you could back it up just 7 days, you'd back it up 7 days and fix it? Probably. If not, if I said 2 weeks, I think we could all be included. Turning points of no return, do-overs, chapter 3. That's where we're at. Now, one of the things that we get, and can you all see that underline okay? From where you're sitting? Okay. Like I say, when I first turned this on today, it filled the whole screen. And I'm a techno genius, so I don't know how to fix that. But the first thing we see the serpent. Now, if you read in there, it just says the serpent. And the serpent was the most cunning of all the wild animals that the Lord had made. And he said to the woman. But notice that the serpent is not identified. It just says the serpent. Now, who's the serpent? Satan. And you know where we find that out? We find out in Revelation chapter 12, in the last book of the Bible, where it talks about Satan as the serpent, the ancient serpent, called the devil and Satan. Which kind of begs the question, why doesn't God tell us who it is? I think the reason for that is the point is not the tempter. The point is the tempted. Because you know what the tempter can do? Nothing. He tempts. He can't make us do anything. Now we've got to remember, Adam and Eve are perfect. They are creation. They're not God. They don't know everything God knows. They can't do everything God does. And you know, there'll come a time that when we go to heaven, guess what? We still won't know everything God knows, and we won't do everything God can do, because if so, then we would be God, and we're never going to be God. We're always going to be creation. But I'll tell you, when we get up to heaven, we're new creation. It's different. And so there's no way this serpent's going to make Adam and Eve do anything. He is not the center of attention. Adam and Eve are. And I think that's why God doesn't identify him. Because then what we might be tempted to do is chase that rabbit down the hole and get talking all the things that Satan does. And he gets enough airtime. He doesn't need a whole lot of conversation among God's people. We just need to know, one, we cannot stand against him. We have to stand against him in the power of Christ and the Holy Spirit. If we're going to stand successfully against the wiles, the temptations of Satan, we do it through Christ. And we know the scripture tells us that God will not tempt us beyond our ability to escape the temptation. He makes a way of escape. You know the best way to escape temptation? Walk away from it. Matter of fact, Paul doesn't say walk when he's writing to Timothy. He says flee. Flee every appearance of evil. So, that's the introduction. Then we get to what he does. And if you look at these, Satan does not have a new bag of tricks. He hasn't had a new bag of tricks since the Garden of Eden. He uses the same 3 questions and comments today that he used then. And the first thing he does in verse 1 is he simply raises a question. He wants to know, do you understand? Did God really say? And then kind of quotes God, but not really. Did God really say you can't eat from any tree in the garden? What is her response? Oh, come on, y'all know this story.
Yeah.
She said, don't touch it.
Yeah, what's her response?
She said God said we couldn't eat it or not even touch it.
Can't eat it or touch it. She added to it.
No. The first thing she says, no, God says we can eat from any of the trees of this garden. Satan says, the serpent says, did God say you can't eat from any of the trees? Did God say don't eat from any? No, God says we can eat from any of the trees. She was right. Then she said, but there's one tree that we're not allowed to eat from. And we're going to look at that in a moment, her response to that, and see where it came from. Okay? And so he just raises that temptation. And her response, we can't eat of it, we shouldn't even touch it lest we die. Now, there have been those who said, well, look, she's adding to it. That was the original sin. No, it wasn't, because, first of all, God didn't tell Eve the command. God told Adam the command. And I wonder if it may be when Adam passed that on to Eve, because we don't know how long Adam was around before God gave him Eve. And can you imagine, they're taking a walk, their first walk together through the garden. And he's showing them all his favorite places, and, oh, you see this, you're going to love this fruit, and, this vegetable is so good, if he called them fruits and vegetables. And they found those little bottles laying around, and 3 tablets of each day. And then they come to the tree in the center of the garden. I know I watch too much TV. And he says, now, Eve, about this tree. We don't eat from it. And honey, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea if we didn't even touch it. Because the reality of sin? If you don't put it in your hand, you probably won't put it in your mouth. And so I don't think Eve is adding anything to what we say, adding anything to what God said that would be contrary to what God would okay. Because he says, when you get around evil, run from it. So when you look at the tree, don't eat it, and if you don't put it in your hands, you can't put it in your mouth. And that may be where that came from, because God just told Adam, don't eat from that tree. And then, God does give us some leeway, figuring out, okay, what's the best way of not eating from that tree? Just don't go near it, don't touch it, and I won't eat from it. And so her response, good or bad, that is a decision you have to make. I think it's a good response. But that's not a cross on our dial. What we do know is God said don't eat from it. But all the serpent did was raise the question. Then the serpent does what he does so well. When you look down in verse 4, he says, oh, no, you won't die. Which, by the way, as I put here, is Satan's first and favorite lie. Now, what he's doing here, he is denying God's word. Now, whether she's added to it or not, she does say what God says. We are not to eat from, we can eat from any of the trees in the garden, but the tree in the middle of the garden, we are not to eat it. We shouldn't even touch it. And then because if we do, the day we do, we will die. And he says, oh, you're not going to die? And how often does Satan use that same line today? But it may sound like this. Oh, listen, what's it going to hurt? Or, well, you're not going to hurt anybody else. It may not be the best thing for you to do, but it's not going to hurt anybody else around you. And I'll tell you, notice today with some of the stuff that we're playing with, one of the purposes, and you don't have to read very deep to find it, one of the purposes of AI is man searching for immortality. And between Mr. Musk and Mr. Gates, they're figuring out how maybe we can put a chip in your brain and we can drop your essence into that thing. And then we can put that in an android, a robot that looks like you, and you'll just keep living on. Now, the old version of that was, don't throw anything at me, this is a dangerous crowd to say this, hair coloring and makeup. What is the purpose? Now be honest, what is the purpose of hair coloring? It helps you look younger, right? I mean, that's okay. And you know, us guys have figured out why you always tell us, oh no, don't color your hair. Men look so much more distinguished with gray hair. Because you know, if we color our hair, we'll look younger than you. And, yeah, well, Bosley can fix that for you, Lonnie. But this idea that we want to try to slow down the aging process. If we can just find the gene, and that's another one of the things that people that are into genetics are doing. If we can just find the gene that causes aging and somehow manipulate that gene, we can slow down or even stop the aging process. People, they're spending millions and millions of dollars at least trying to do that. Why? Because we don't want to die. And Satan says, oh, listen, you're not going to die. And then, in the next verse, he's going to imply that God's holding back. Because he says, in fact, God knows that when you eat, your eyes will be open and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Now see, that's one thing he tried and it didn't work. He wanted to be God. Now, he's tempting others to go against God too.
Dr. did you hear the movie? Sit there and remind me, there was 3 miles contact the bed and
Mm-hmm.
but everybody he ever loved, he lost.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Disney put one out called Tuck Everlasting. That was really sad. I mean, because the person never, I think it was the Tuck, never got old. And he wanted to because same reason. But here, them saying, well, you know, the reason God doesn't want you to do this is because he doesn't want competition.
I think that's the first time they ever heard the word evil. Okay.
I often wondered what they knew about death and evil.
They didn't know, but what is evil?
Yeah. Yeah. So there it is. And do you know how we can all say with confidence, this is how Satan tempts even today? Because John writes in 1 John chapter 2, do not love the world or the things of the world. Don't be enticed by the lust of the eye, the lust of the flesh, the pride of life. And he tempts in those directions regularly because that's all he needs to tempt him. And so he lays out the temptation, and then we don't hear from him again until God shows up. But what we do see is we see Eve pondering. This she doesn't flee. You ever notice it doesn't bother her that the snake's talking to her? You know what that tells me? Dr. Seuss is true. Not Dr. Doolittle. Dr. Doolittle is true. You know? Yeah, it was not. Maybe they talked to animals back then. Who knows? But that didn't seem to surprise her.
There's a donkey talk to man.
Oh yeah, that's the fun one. They made a movie out of it eventually called Shrek. But yeah, Balaam and his talking donkey. That is a hilarious story. God has such a sense of humor. But he gets his point across. So what do we see? We see Eve moving into the arenas of sin. And here I just quoted 1 John 2:16. Everything in the world. And this is how he categorizes everything in the world. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of one's possession, or in other translations, the pride of life. It says this is not from the Father, but is from the world. And you know, the world is at odds against God. Because when the New Testament's talking about the world, it's not talking about the planet we live on. It's talking about the systems of our world, the philosophies and the teachings and all of those things. That if they're connected to the world and not to God, then we can't please God. And so let's see how Eve fits into what John wrote in 1 John. First of all, as you continue reading down in verse 6, then the woman saw that the tree was good for food. The word saw is a word that means she was intensely looking at it. It wasn't a quick glance. I mean, she is looking, she's pondering. She says, that really is pretty looking fruit. I remember when my son was younger, he said, they always say it's that. We don't know what fruit it was, by the way. He said, I don't think it was an apple. If it was going to be tempting me, it would be a watermelon, which would make interesting trees. But this look, isn't that she's looking at trees. She is looking and she's thinking. And when we'll stop and do that, we start getting those temptations. And rather than recognizing them for what they are, he flat told her that God lied to you and his word doesn't mean anything. And that should have been enough evidence for her to say, listen, I don't know who you are, but I'm out of here.
Pastor John, what you just said a few minutes ago makes me look at you a little bit differently. When you said the philosophies and systems of this world do influence us, and they do, our culture, tremendously, where we don't even know it sometimes.
Yep.
And yet she has none, really.
Yeah.
And that means our nature would have sinned no matter what.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, we had the potential to because God gave us the potential to choose. What we have to be careful of, and I know this is not what Connie's saying, but there is a line of thought out there, even among some conservative evangelicals, that God not only, he does allow sin. We can't say God doesn't allow sin. They're actually saying, well, God's in control of all things, so God actually causes sin. He's the source of sin. There's a French word for that, it's baloney. Because it says in James, God does not tempt us to sin because he is not tempted to sin. And so he doesn't tempt us the same way. So when we look at this, her problem was that, she looked at it. And she had everything she needed to walk away from it. 2 feet. And ears that heard. And again, when we stick this with chapters 1 and 2, it begs the question, how did this happen? So she looked, and what did she see? First of all, she saw it was good for food. Lust of the flesh. It was going to be satisfying to her. She also saw that it was pleasing to the eye. Lust of the eye. And when you think of the temptation comes in and out of our lives, how often does it deal with something that we think will be good for us or something that looks nice? You know how Satan almost never comes? He virtually, I won't say it, never. But he usually doesn't come in his red pajamas and his pitchfork. He comes as an angel of light. He's coming like, well, let me help you understand God a little bit better. And so she sees that the tree is going to be satisfying, it's pleasing, it's good to look at. And then the pride of life, desirable to make one wise. I'll become like God. Now, we all get to live long enough, we can see more and more of this stuff coming out. Be like God. What can God do? God can do anything. God can do miracles. And look at one of the biggest controversies of this part of the 21st century. I mean, what is causing more uproar in our nation right now than probably any other sin that our nation's involved in?
There's so many.
Transgender. Transgender. And what does transgender say? I can change who I am. I can change my orientation. In other words, I can recreate myself. Now, if you ask them, they're not going to say that. They're not going to say, oh, I'm not trying to be God. But to think that a person can change who they are and become something that they were never made to be. And I know that there are those that have dysphoria. I'm not discounting some of those illnesses that are out there. But can a person really change their gender? No. All it takes is a simple blood test. And I went to it was at the Kentucky Baptist Convention, and they had a speaker from Nashville. He's I forget who he was. He pastored a church in Nashville. But one of the things that he brought out, because that was one of the main sessions during the convention, was talking, what do we do with this alphabet stuff that's going on? What do we do with it as a church? How do we minister? And he says, you watch and see as these folks get older, they begin to realize they made a mistake, because the battle is in the mind. The body tells the truth. You stand in front of a mirror, your body will tell you what gender you are. And that's the truth. You can't change that. Now, you can change the appearance of it. But all the markings are there that you changed it. Scars, missing things. And your mind's telling you that, well, but, this is who you are now. But your body's saying, no, this is not who I am. And there is the battle of the mind in these. That's one way we can pray for folks that are battling with this, is they are at war with their mind, and their mind is lying to them. And that's why the Apostle Paul writes in Romans chapter 12, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. You've got to think the way God thinks, because our minds will lie to us. Jeremiah said it this way, the heart is above all things evil and deceptive and let me get it right. I think deceptive and exceedingly wicked. People say, oh, just follow your heart. Be careful. Your heart deceives. And the heart to the Jewish person was the center of the will. And in us, we think the center of our will is our thoughts. That's where we make our determinations. And so what we've come to now, we say, listen, we can live forever. We can change who we are, who God made us to be. When, at conception, we can change all that. We can be like God. And we can decide what's good and evil. And that's out there too, right? You don't hear it as much as you used to be. That little quip that used to go around, well, you just have to hold on to your truth. Your truth may not be my truth. Look, folks, truth is truth. And no one determines what truth is. God determines what truth is. And then we decide whether we will accept the truth of God or not. And so what the serpent is tempting to, he still does. And so what did she do? Y'all know. She ate the fruit. She ate the fruit. And as you read in chapter 6, verse 6, you find out that misery likes company, so does sin. The woman saw the tree was good for food and delightful to look at, and that it was desirable for obtaining wisdom. So she took some of the fruit and ate it, and she gave it to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. What Eve did not do is go looking for Adam. It's very simple. It's right there in simple language. Adam was there. Which begs the question, why didn't he stop her? And that's there's can have good conversations that way why he didn't stop her. But the reality is he was there. We don't know when he walked in on the conversation. He might have walked in on the conversation. He looked over and Eve's talking to a snake, and evidently the snake could maybe stand upright because God, the curse of the snake's got crawled in its belly. And so here she's over here, what was she talking to him for? And it begins, this whole chapter begins that the serpent was the most cunning. It was the best at spinning words. And so maybe he walked over while they were talking. But anywhere he walked into that conversation, didn't matter, even if he didn't hear the conversation. He might have walked up and she was just looking at him. What you looking at? I'm just looking at the tree. Well, maybe we should go. Oh, you had the best conversation with that snake over there. Tell me what you think about it. We don't know. But what we know is she ate it, and then she turned around. And the way it's written and the language it's written in says he was right there. And he might have heard it all. And God gave him the command, don't eat from that tree. But he took it and he ate from it. Now, what might have been some of the motivations? I think we can ask that question. What might have motivated Adam to go against what God had directly told him not to do? Because remember, right now, he doesn't have a sin nature. You know, he's not having the sin nature's not battling with the godly nature in him. He is a perfect person. But what might have been running through his mind?
Please his wife.
Okay, maybe he wanted to, okay, Eve, we're partners. You're a helpmate. If you think this is a good idea. Yeah, he might have wanted to please his wife. What did he know was going to happen if they ate that fruit?
It didn't hurt her, it hurt me.
Yeah, that's one thing. She's still alive. But again, what did they know about death? We don't know. But could it be that, nothing happened, so it must be okay. Or, if she's going to die, I don't want to live without her. We don't know. But what we do know is, and this I was joking about it last night, and I don't know if it's like this. Like I say, I'm working on more than a bushel of things that I'm going to have to explain to God why I said it. Let's say Donnie goes to heaven for me. And I go 1,000 years later, which tells you this is just a story. And I find, hey, Donnie, how's that going? Yeah, good. Hey, listen, you've been here a long time. That couple over there, who are they? I've been here 1,000 years, and I have no idea who those people are. And I asked, when I got here, I asked the same thing. I asked people who've been here a lot longer than me. That two couple, who are they? I know everybody else, I don't know them. Because what's the chance that Adam and Eve are under the witness protection program?
Yeah.
Nobody knows who they are, because every time someone new would get there, they would walk up and say, "What were you thinking?" Because until Jesus returns, how are we getting to heaven? We're dying. Yeah. So, maybe just didn't want to be without. But one thing is for certain. The question is, and this question comes up regularly, but they didn't die. Or did they? Chapter 3, 7 through 13 will give us an indication that there is more to death than physical. Then their eyes were both opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden at the time of the evening breeze, or in the cool of the day, and they hid themselves from the Lord among the trees. So the Lord called out to them, to the man, and said, "Adam, where are you?" See, the reality is they did die. They died spiritually that day. And do you know that spiritual death is more of a reality than physical death? Because in physical death, though we cease to live in these bodies, we do not cease to exist. This death, no matter if you're a believer or not, is temporary. The moment the believer or the unbeliever dies, They go to they go to another destination, but they continue to live, just not in these bodies. Spiritual life is eternal. Spiritual death, which is separation from God. As a matter of fact, when Paul uses the idea of spiritual death, he uses a different Greek word for death than the typical word for death. Because he wants to designate that everyone dies, but then there is a death worse than physical death, and that is that separation from God for eternity in a very terrible place that God did not prepare for mankind, but mankind has made a home because that we have done through our ancestors Adam and Eve the same thing that the devil did when the devil said, I want it my way and I'm doing it my way and I'm going my way. And God says, okay, let me know how that works for you. As I said yesterday, we can definitely make our choices. We just don't choose our consequences. And so they did experience a radical change. And isn't that what death brings us? It's a real radical change. Even for the living, death brings such a change. It's a separation. It brings sorrow. It brings loneliness. It brings uncertainty. It sets us off on a new course in life. Now, death is a powerful thing. And of course, for the person who dies, their eternity is set at that point of death. There's no changing it. There's no second chances once you pass this life on to the next, into the next. And so how did it manifest itself? One, they hid from God. Now, what I really like about this passage as far as who God is, in verse 8 it says that the man and the woman heard the sound of God walking in the garden. They recognized God's sound. What does that tell us?
They were friends with him, they'd spend time.
They spent time with him. Maybe they thought, oh, that's God coming. Right on. And I'd say that was an enjoyable walk maybe it was every day. Can you imagine that? We will someday. You know, one of the attributes of God that is a mystery to me, but I get excited about is his omnipresence, which means he can be everywhere, anytime, in his total essence, in his total being, which could it mean then that when we go to heaven, we don't have to stand in line to talk to Jesus? Could it be that he's omnipresent? And so, I want to go for a walk, and any really just fanatical coffee drinkers in here? Oh, it's okay. Used to. Yeah, you might. My brother and I talk about this. I want to go for a walk or a hike. You'll want to sit down and drink a cup of coffee with him. Maybe we'll be able to. That was in the last book of Left Behind. That was something I thought about before that, but maybe it is that way. But they recognized the sound of God. He had spent time with them and realized he took the initiative because they couldn't go to be where he was. He had to come to be where they were. And they recognized the sound of him walking in the garden, and they hid from him. That's a sign of a radical change. Why were they hiding? Why does Adam say they were hiding? We were naked and ashamed. And God says to Adam, who said you were naked? Remember at the end of chapter 2, the two become one flesh, and the man and the woman was naked, and they were not ashamed. Now they are. Sin does that in life. So they hid from God, but God came looking. And then they also passed the blame. Now I'm going to be bouncing back to God. This is what they're doing. Then we're going to come back to what God's doing, because the story's about him. Then they passed the blame. You all know how this works. God says to Adam, right spot, who told you that you were naked? Did you eat from the tree I commanded you not to eat from? Well, the woman you gave me, she gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate it. Now, what's Adam doing?
Putting it off on somebody else.
Yeah, who's he putting it off on?
Excuse.
God. The woman you gave me. I tell you guys, you can't pull that one with God right now. He said, I didn't make him area. Now, it's true, God gave him Eve. But he's blaming Eve. But you know, Adam had the same command that Eve quoted to the serpent. And so, it would have been hard to say, honey, I don't know what death means, but God said don't do this, and look what he's given us, and there is no way that our Father who loves us this much, am I going to go against him? But it's just unfathomable, isn't it? What must have run through his mind. But he could have said no. So, he says to the woman, what have you done? And what does she do? She blames the serpent. And the word there is great. I like the King James Version. It says, the serpent beguiled me, and I did eat. Now, Clint Eastwood did a movie called Beguiled. It's been redone a couple of times since then. But the word beguiled means that he absolutely tricked me. He didn't come right out and say to her, oh, eat from that tree, nothing's going to happen. He slowly drew her into that conversation. And he kept giving her a little, does she now know the difference between good and evil? Uh-huh.
Yeah.
But you know what? It wasn't what she was expecting. He wasn't lying to her. Oh, listen, you know, God just doesn't want you to know everything he knows. But God, another word is, a lot of translations, the serpent deceived me. And what's true about a good deception is, it's 99% true. A good deception is always 99% true. Because if it starts out lying, no one's lying. And I've shared this with the Sunday school class before, and I share it with every class every year. I teach this at school. I had a lady when I was at Harlem Baptist that gave me one of those calendars that you peel a date off every day and has a saying. And somewhere in my box of trinkets hidden in the house, where I can't find them either now, I've kept that. And it really illustrates what's happened here. And the little saying goes like this. If you take a bucket of garbage, and it wasn't written by a Baptist, by the way, you'll get that in the next phrase. If you take a bucket of garbage and put a tablespoon of wine in it, you've got a bucket of garbage. If you take a bucket of wine and put a tablespoon of garbage in it, you still have a bucket of garbage. It doesn't take a lot. It just takes enough. And he was good. He snookered her. And then he stepped back. No pressure, just innuendo. Could it be that God? So the serpent beguiled me, and I did eat. They played the blade. You notice when God comes to the serpent, he doesn't ask the serpent what he did. God already knows the heart of the serpent. He kicked him out of heaven already. So that's what they did. But that's not the amazing part of the story. The amazing part of the story is what God did. So let's back up. Verse 8 again. First of all, God came looking. Adam and Eve were not looking for God. They were hiding from God. They heard him coming and they hid from him. But God came looking for them. And that is how salvation works. God takes the initiative. He takes the initiative not only to draw us, but he took the initiative before Christ even died on the cross. We said it yesterday like a zillion times. The lamb slain from the foundation of the world. God comes looking. That's the amazing agape of God, is he comes looking. Now, when he says, Adam, where are you? Wasn't because Adam and Eve were really good at playing hide and seek. No, God created the garden. God made him that garden. He knew all the hiding spots were. What was he saying to Adam? Adam, where are you?
What have you done?
What have you done? Adam, where are you? He's saying, Adam, where are you in your relationship with me? Why are you hiding from me? Because he does say that. Adam, where are you? What's he giving Adam a chance to do? Confess. He's giving him a chance to confess and repent. Because that's what God desires. God desires none to die, but all to come to repentance. That's what he desires. And he gave him an opportunity. As a matter of fact, how many opportunities? Adam, where are you? Well, we heard you in the garden and we were naked and we were ashamed and we were hiding from you. Then what's God say?
Told you were naked.
Who told you you were naked? So how many chances has God given Adam to repent? 2. Where are you? Who said that to you? And either one of those spots, you know what Adam had to do? Father, I know that you know what I did. But I'm going to own it. I did this. But he doesn't do it. He looks to Eve. How many chances does she get? God says to her, what have you done? She blames the serpent. That's at least one. But she's listening to the conversation with Adam, that God's having with Adam. So what's the chance that Eve's listening to all this, and anywhere in that, she could have interjected, Father, God, whatever she called him. Listen, I did this to him. Satan tempted me. The serpent tempted me. I ate. I gave it to him. It's not his fault. Yeah, it was his fault. But she's standing there listening to God have this conversation with Eve, and she's just being, with Adam, she's just being quiet. So what's the chance? She had 3 opportunities. Don't know. But what he's giving you a chance to do is to confess and repent. You know, an interesting thing, when you go into Leviticus chapter 5, where it talks about sin offering. And in the conversation about the sin offering, it says that when you realize you have sinned, here's what you do. You confess your sin. Then you bring your offering. God doesn't want an offering before he gets confession. We've got to own it. And he's giving them a chance from the very beginning to do that. And we all know the end result. So, the punishment. You all know the punishment. What does he do to the serpent?
Makes him crawl.
Yeah, he gets kind of a double whammy. One is he's cursed and he's crushed. He's cursed in that no one likes him. Then there are those people. But most people, you know, even if you kind of like the critters, when you just kind of walk up on one, you know, and I know you don't kill black snakes, they're supposed to take care of copperheads, but when the garage is dark, and you see it coiled in the corner, and you can't tell if it's copper colored or black. And you know, those black snakes are getting kind of sneaky. I don't know if it's true. I've heard people say, oh, you know, that copperheads and black snakes are starting to crossbreed. Because I had one lived in my garage for a while when we first moved into our new house. And when I first looked at it, it was kind of dark, and it looked like it had colorings of a copperhead. And I wasn't close enough, and I wasn't wondering close enough, to see if it had the right shaped head, the right kind of eyes, or kind of stuff. I mean, if you're close enough to see the head and the eyes, you're going to get nailed. And so I tried to catch it with a stick. Finally, and it got back into the foundation of my house, in the garage. That was fun. And so I just let it go, and I came out, the next day, and sit in that same spot by the garage door. But now there's plenty of, I said, oh, it's a black snake. So I reached down and just took a hold of it, and very gently, it's one of God's little creatures, very gently took it out and laid it in the woods. And I said, you'll find you another home. A couple days later, it's right back there. All Charlene and I got figure is that snake had some eggs under the house. You know, who knows? And sitting right there, and I said, listen, you can't. And I reached down, and I grabbed that snake again. This time I just pitched it out the garage door, and it flew about a third of the way down the driveway, and boom, it kind of rolled a little bit, turned around, came back towards the garage. And I forget what I called him. I wanted to call him dead, but I said, no. And I went and I picked him up again and pitched him in the woods. Who knows? He's probably still living under the house. But you know, nobody likes a snake, it would seem. And he's going to crawl on his belly. He's going to eat dirt. The idea, and which would suppose that the snake at one time could walk upright. But what's the symbolism of crawling on your belly? I can't hear. Scum of the earth, lowest of the low. Total humiliation. You're crawling on your belly, you're eating dirt. But that wasn't the big one, was it? What was the crushed part? Look at chapter 3, verse 15. This is the very first, it's called Messianic because it's describing the Messiah. Messianic passage. Here we are right at the beginning. We get the gospel in chapter 1, we get Messiah in chapter 3. I will put hostility between you and the woman, between your offspring and her offspring. He will strike the offspring will strike your head, and you will strike his heel. Now, not every snake, if you get bit on the heel, you have to worry about. There are some you do. Some of y'all may have spent some time in Vietnam, they were there. But most of the time, if you got bit on an extremity, you just kind of wish you were dead because it makes you miserable. But to be certain to kill a snake, you crush its head, right? You don't cut it in half. You cut it in half, pick it up. What's it going to do? It's going to bite you. To crush its head. So, the serpent's going to make the world sick. The serpent is going to make Christ sick to the point where he dies on a cross. However, he's going to be resurrected. But the serpent is not. When Jesus said, "It is finished," the head of the serpent was crushed. How many have seen The Passion of the Christ? Yeah. That scene in the garden is really good. Got that big albino snake crawling up on him. And just as he's getting ready to get him, what's he do? Crushes his head. And I don't think Mel Gibson was too far off on that. I had a friend who pastored when I was pastoring in Harlan. And he said that he's convinced that our salvation was bought on the cross. It was paid for on the cross. It was won in the garden when Jesus said, "Not my will, but yours be done," and it was settled. And he was going to die. Nothing was going to stop him from dying. Crushed the serpent's head. And then, how about to the woman? Ladies, I'll let you answer this one. You can amen it if you would like. You increase pain in childbirth, and your desire will be for your husband, but it will be strained. So let's see what he says. He said to the woman, "I will intensify your labor pains when you bear children. With painful effort, your desire will be for your husband, yet he will rule over you." So two things going on here. One, notice that he says, "I will increase your pain in childbirth." It didn't say he was going to make it hurt. Because what God did not do with Eve is change her physiologically. Okay? When she had a baby, she's going to know she had a baby. But he's going to intensify it. And there's folks out there, and my mom wasn't one of these. My mom told Charlene when she was trying to decide natural childbirth or take whatever they give you. And Mom said, "Oh, honey, don't be a hero. Take whatever they give you." So she had an epidural. And some said, "Well, that's just going against the will of God. You're supposed to have increased pain in childbearing." Scripture also says that one reason a woman doesn't mind having a second one is they forget. When the baby comes, there's joy, and they forget how bad it was to get them there. And I've had women say, "Oh, no, you don't. You never forget that." But there is more pain in the life of a mother than the birth of a child.
There's something else about a woman's relationship to God in this. It brings us closer to God. God bore his son in pain. He had the pain of his son living and knowing he's going to die and dying on a cross for us. And it's not just when you have a baby that it's painful the whole time you raise them as a mother. And you have to give them to God as if they're dead. Like, here's my child. It's up to you, God, because we don't have power on what happens to them. So it's a gift from God that helps us be closer.
I think that's exactly what he's talking about. That baby's going to be raised in a sin-devastated world. And I've shared this with the class, at Sunday Sunday school class. And Charlene, I'm sure, remembers this story quite well because it was traumatic. Went to Knoxville Zoo. Andrew's this big. Casey's this big. Her mom and dad's with us. We're at the bird show in the outside amphitheater by the bird place. And I'm sitting down with Casey on the stone wall, and Andrew's back with Charlene, her mom and dad, behind us. Looks up, Charlene says, "I'm thirsty." Charlene must have said, "Go tell your dad." He comes down and says, "Dad, I'm thirsty." I said, "Go tell your mom." And we watched the show. And 15 minutes later, the show was over, and we got up. I got with Casey, we turned around and walked towards Charlene and Charlie and Louise, and Charlene said, "Where's Andrew?" I said, "No, he's with you." "No, I sent him down because he was thirsty. I sent him down to you." I said, "Well, I sent him back to you." He'd been separated from us for 15 minutes. Do you know where the Knoxville Zoo is? It's wonderfully located by I-40 and 640. You can get anywhere in the United States from there. In 15 minutes is plenty of time. And we started screaming, and Charlene started crying, "Andrew!" Everyone's crying. People looking around saying, "Who is Andrew? Is he in trouble or what?" And it was devastating. Now, my son is 33, right? 34. And he was probably 2 or 3 when that happened. So that's how long ago this has been. And it still bothers me. And finally, when all was over, here comes a zookeeper carrying our son with a snow cone. Evidently, Andrew remembered at the head of that sidewalk to get into that place we were sitting was a snow cone stand. And he comes up and looks at Charlene because she is just about to melt with anguish and says, "I guess this must be Andrew." That is increased pain in childbirth. And I've done too many funerals of children whose mothers are still alive. And they say, "Preacher, it just isn't right. A mother should never outlive their child." And do you know when a mom quits worrying about their kids? When the mom dies. Not when the kids do. That's what's happened. I think that's what we see in Eve. And why does she kind of get a double thing here? She did this. And then her relationship will be strained with her husband. Your desire will be there. And as you read it in the original, it's the idea of you will want your relationship to be what it used to be. I mean, ladies, can you imagine a perfect husband? Of course you can't. But they had a perfect relationship. He was totally attentive, totally kind. And she loved him so much that she was willing to be. And see, that was life before the fall. And now it's strained. Welcome to the battle of the sexes. And it's getting. I thought it was going away in the late 90s, early 2000s. It's coming back in an uproar. And nobody wants equality. Everyone wants superiority. That's the battle. And then he says to Adam, "Your work is not going to be fulfilling, and you're going to do it till you die." Now he's a gardener, and all of a sudden the ground's cursed. He's going to get thorns and thistles. And the crop's not going to be like it used to be. And you're going to have to work hard at it. And you know the reality, I'll bet we have, just among the men here, I'll bet we probably have as many occupations as we do guys sitting in this room. And now we throw you ladies in the mix, because most of y'all work. But ask me this, is your work, does it totally fulfill your life? But you just can't wait in the morning, every morning, and you wish you didn't have the weekends off because your work is so much more fulfilling than sitting around the house. Yeah, I make this enough, you'll finally. I tell my students that I understand the blessing of what God's got in the calling of my life. They pay to sit in class and listen to me talk. I get paid to talk. I get paid to read the Bible. And then I come here and it starts all over again. But do you know there are times the last thing I want to do is crawl out of bed and crawl into a classroom? And there are times, and hope this doesn't hurt your feelings and hope you don't fire me when I say it. There are times I don't want to crawl in the pulpit here either. There are times I don't want to go to that meeting. There are times I don't want to have that conference and that counseling time. All work is cursed. Even with preachers and Bible college teachers, I don't find the fullness of life in what I do. I find it in who I do it for. And so, Adam, don't look for fullness in your job. If you're going to find a full life, meaningful life, you need to look to me. And the world has lied to us. Ladies, been lying to you all. The family, that's not important. Get out there and make something of yourself. Man, I've watched Charlene raise kids, and watched my mom raise us. She was a stay-at-home mom. And at least when I go home from the office, my job's done. And when Charlene comes home from the office, she just gets started. But the kids are gone, so we tag team a lot of stuff. I like doing dishes because you have to put in the dishwasher. And I like doing laundry, except sweaters, because I don't like being scolded. Because at one point in time, it's all done. And then it starts over again. But all of that to say this, life for them changed. It changed.
Something I've always wondered is about the curse of man through Adam and Eve. Had Adam and Eve resisted the temptation and not sin? And then their sons then would have eaten from the tree. Would that have brought sin into the world and us be cursed?
Someone would have brought it in.
Something.
Yeah, if Adam and Eve hadn't sinned, we'd all be walking around in a perfect place naked. And you get tired of picking clothes out. We don't. We don't know. If whoever would have sinned would have brought sin into the world, and through the line of that person,
So we'd be in the same state as not going to be on.
I think so. Yeah. I often wonder what would have happened if they would have repented.
Or if Adam said no, only Eve did it.
Yeah.
And there's another tree there too.
Yeah, and that, well, let's get to that other tree. Nice segue. And so he kicks him out. He kicks him out. He sends them away from the home that he built for them. That garden that he planted, he sends them away. It was a perfect place. They had a perfect life. They had a wonderful relationship with God. Now, because of their own selfishness, I want what I want kind of thing, everything has changed for them. But what's amazing in this is God is once again going to show them grace. The first point of grace is when he came looking for them. The second one is in 21 and 22, when the Lord says, the Lord made clothing, Moses writes, that the Lord made clothing from skins for man, and for the man and his wife, and he clothed them. Okay, that's the first thing he does is he meets a need. How long fig leaves going to last? I'll try with maple leaves or oak leaves or any kind of leaves. That's just a temporary fix. The best we can do is temporary fixes. God gives them a better fix. Now, what we don't want to say with this, and it's often said, is this was the first sin offering. God didn't say anything about doing an offering, but it is a type. Now, typology is when you can see Jesus in things. This is the first time that the innocent has died to cover the guilty. So it's not, God wasn't doing a blood offering. God was simply killing a sheep or goat or whatever it was to clothe them so that clothing would be more permanent, or at least teach them that how to do it, so that their clothing would be better, that they would be covered. And that animal that died did nothing to deserve that. That's the gospel. So in Genesis 1 and at the end of Genesis 3, from perfection to sin, the gospel is being preached. And right in the middle of it all, we know that he's going to do it through the seed of the woman. So God meets a need. And then, this one may be a new thought for you, he allows them to die. Now, how is dying a touch of God's grace?
Don't have to close the earth.
And I'm toiling there. Brother Ben, I'm sorry, I forgot your first name. You died in purple.
Dennis.
Dennis. Dennis. What Dennis said was, there's the other tree, the tree of life. God drives him out of the garden, and let's see why God drives him out of the garden. Verse 22, the Lord God said, since man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil, he must not reach out and take from the tree of life and eat and live forever. Now, my translation puts a period there. And as I mentioned yesterday, Hebrew has no punctuation. However, it will give you an indication if a sentence is done by the way they write. The punctuation is wrong. It's wrong in every translation you'll read that I've seen. Because when you look at this in the original, the punctuation that should be there is not a period, it's an ellipsis. You know what an ellipsis is? That has 3 dots at the end. What does that mean when you put 3 dots at the end of a sentence? There's something else coming. I had a Hebrew teacher when I was in seminary that he was working this passage. He said, now, guys, let's see the mind of God here. And then he read it with what should be the right punctuation, and it sounds like this. Since man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil, he must not reach out his hand and take from the tree of life and eat and live forever. He couldn't finish the sentence. And his thought was, you know why he couldn't finish the sentence? That was too terrible for him to even think about. And we all get it, I think. Took care of my mom for 2 years, dying of dementia. What if she never died? What if she just kept losing that mind? And that body kept breaking down? I mean, I'd run out of surgeries. I've replaced most of what could be replaced. And, but what if we never died? Do you know what death does for the believer? Does everything. It's that portal into eternity with God. God could have, he said, well, you know, let's let them eat of that tree, and then they'll see just how stupid this thing was. But he doesn't do that. He lets them die. The curse is eternal separation from God. But God made a way to fix that. From the very beginning, he made a way to fix that. And that was through Christ. So now, as believers, I don't look forward to dying. Even though after I do, it's not going to bother me. You know, I'm not going to know that my wife is sad and my grandkids are going to miss me, and they're going to find out they don't have any inheritance from me if their mom wants to give them, Granny wants to give them some. You know, I won't care. But on this side of death, I think about, what will that do to them? I don't like it. But through the grace of God, my dad didn't linger for eternity with leukemia that was just slowly killing him. And finally did. And you all have people in your lives, and even in your own life. I mean, how's that body doing right now? You don't even gonna get any better until they can take your essence, put it in a chip, stick it into a robot, and it can live forever. So God provided for their needs, and he allowed them to die. Those are, once again, God showing us his grace. Then we get some lessons. Here's 3. You can add more if you like. Man, we got to remember, we're responsible for our own sins. Okay? Sin brings a heavy penalty. They lost everything. And through it all, God was gracious. But we are responsible for our own sin. Now, one more thing before we move on. At the end of chapter 2, God explains how relationships are supposed to work. Chapter 3 tells us how we broke them. However, speaking to us guys again, that doesn't give us permission to be a bunch of bubbas in the way we treat people in our lives, especially our spouses. Because we live on this side of the cross. Yes, we still are living, struggling with sin. But in Christ we become a new creation. Which means I got to let go of the old ways and let the new ways come. And the way we as men ought to be treating our spouses is the way that Adam would have treated Eve before the fall. And we can't be perfect at it because we're not perfect until we go to be with the Lord. But we can act a whole lot better than before we were believers. And ladies, same thing. You know, the relationship will never be exactly as we would like it to be, either the husband or the wife. But with Christ in us, we can overcome everything. We have no excuse to say, well, I just can't do that. And God would say, well, you're absolutely right. You can't. But guess what? I can. So, that's chapter 3. Start all over again. I don't know where it went off. No, the sons of God thing.
This was there. That's what was there.
Okay, so we're still in it, and I don't think that went off for very long. Now let me, is it recording? Yes. Sons of God. There's another issue that would suggest that the angels can't do that. And that is when Jesus is confronted with the question of resurrection, from all people, the Sadducees who did not believe in the resurrection, okay? But they said, we know this guy, he married a woman and he died, and they practiced the Levirate law. She then married the next brother and he died, and whose wife is she going to be in the resurrection? And Jesus says you err in two areas. First of all, in the resurrection, there is no marriage or given in marriage. We will be like the angels. And most scholars look at that and say what he's saying is, angels don't procreate. There's no need, which then would make it impossible for them to be procreating with humanity. Also, a good angel would never go against God, and they would have to know that's a no-no. And so, can it be that? I don't think so. That sounds more like Greek and Roman mythology, where the gods played with humanity with no kindness in mind. We were just toys to them. They'll go on to say, well, what about the Nephilim? Well, we'll go on to say in a minute about the Nephilim. So who could they be? And Sister mentioned very wonderfully, if you'll go back to chapter 4, verse 26, a son was born to Seth also, and he named him Enosh. And at that time, people began to call on the name of the Lord. Now, I mentioned yesterday and this morning, God has so much more that he could give us than he gave us. So everything's important. And when you look at the documents before the chapters and verses, this just reads as one long story. Now, we'll break it a chapter and forget what the chapters were before. But here we have, hey, people are calling on the name of the Lord, unlike the line of Cain. Because Cain's genealogy is before Seth is mentioned. So, could it be that the sons of God are the righteous? The daughters of men are the unrighteous. And I think I mentioned this yesterday. Why is it that God tells us not to be unequally yoked? Because chances are better than good. The odds are astronomically against anyone. When 5% of the marriages that start unequally yoked will end equally yoked. 95% will not. The other 95%, many of that 95% will be influenced away from Christ in the church. Because it just ain't worth the fight. Is that still on there? Okay. So, looking through a biblical lens, I think not our best option, but the option, is this isn't some supernatural event that's creating some kind of a odd race between the spiritual world and the physical world. Now, the angels can dwell in both places. It says in Hebrews that there are times we'll entertain angels without being aware of it. Angels can pass back and forth between the spiritual barrier and the physical barrier, as God dictates for them to do. Because angels are nothing but servants and messengers of God. They don't do anything on their own accord. And do you suppose God would say, oh yeah, go ahead and mess up my children even more? No, He's not going to do that. So, but what it does show us, that man, because of probably this, because of what's going on in their marriages, that God says that He's going to bring them to the point of judgment. My spirit will not contend, remain, or whatever. In other words, God comes to the place where He says, I'm done. I'm done. And you know, God will come to the place where He'll say, I'm done. Do we know when that is? No. So don't press the barrier. So, but then He'll come back and say, but wait a minute, read a little further. You didn't read enough, preacher. It says in the last part of verse 3, besides that they were terribly corrupt, we'll look at that word corrupt in a minute, their days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth both in those days and afterwards. Well, the Nephilim were when the sons of God and the daughters of men came together and they became men of renown, big guys. Okay. And then so I say, see? The Nephilim were the fallen angels. Now where they get the idea is the word Nephil means fallen. Actually it means fallen one. I am on the end of it. Most Hebrew words is like putting an S on the end of a noun in English. It makes it plural. This is Nephilim. Cherubim, seraphim. Means there's more than one. So what that word translates out to is fallen ones. Who are the fallen ones? We are. And how do we know that there's no way in the world that this is describing some kind of an unnatural, supernatural race? Because it says they were on earth both in those days, the day we're reading of, and afterward, after the ark. So unless one of them boogers stowed away on the ark, he did. What didn't change after the flood was man's fallen nature. Adam took it with him. So did his sons. And we see that in chapter 10. When Cain makes fun of his dad. And Cain's son, Ham, gets in trouble for it. So, I really think that Sons of God thing is out there. Trust me, it is out there a lot of places. And the best thing we can do when someone says, well, what do you think? Is walk them through Scripture. Let them argue with the Scripture. I mean, I asked this last night. Most of y'all, all y'all, perhaps are Christians. If, Donnie, you're a Christian. So what does that make you to God? A son. Okay, Connie, you're a Christian. A daughter. Sons of God. Now let me tell you how Hebrew works on this. If it's a mixed crowd, they always use male. They always use masculine. If it's a mixed crowd. Now if it's just if this was a ladies' conference, and Charlene was up here doing this, and you were all ladies, you could easily say daughters of God. Because in the Hebrew, they would use the feminine because it's only ladies. But when it's ladies and men, it's a patriarchal system. Everybody then is called he, sons. But he's talking about everyone. Paul does this, or John does the same thing in 1 John when he says that gives us the right to be called the sons of God. That's in the Greek. A lot of translations will say children of God, because you know what? The Greeks did the same thing the Hebrews did. If it's a mixed crowd, you go with the masculine. If it's it could mean it's only men, but it could also be mixed. But if it's in the feminine, it means there's only ladies there. So that's just an aside. One of the things we see here, according to verse 5, is sin is out of control. In chapter 6, verse 5, when When the Lord saw the human wickedness was widespread on the earth, and every inclination of the human mind or heart, mine says mind, but it's literally heart, okay, because the heart was the seat of the will. That's for us, it's the mind. The human heart was only evil all the time. Now, that doesn't sound like out of control. Everything that mankind thought about was evil. Now, if you watch the Russell Crowe Noah movie, which was a really good piece of science fiction, it said, and finally, it started out with the subtitle based on biblical account, and they finally changed it where it said loosely based on the it wasn't even based on Noah, that and an ark. That was right. But they really depict the evilness of humanity well in that. How evil has humanity become that God's ready to say, I'm done. Remember, God so loves the world, but God also says, you can only mock me for so long, and I will stop it. And when it says not just every act, but every little thought was evil. Evil is the opposite of holy. So everything that they were thinking and doing was opposite of what God wanted them to do. And it was all the time. And it says in verse 6 that he was deeply grieved concerning all that man had become. Now, some translations, and it's not a bad translation, will say, and God was sorry that he created man. But it wasn't the idea of God saying, man, why did I do this? This was the biggest mistake I made. Jesus, wait a minute, Father said to the Son, because of Jesus is the creator of John 1, why wouldn't the Father said to the Son, what in the world are you thinking? Why did you do that? No, that's not what it means. I think what we have to do is let the Scripture be a commentary. And you go to the very strong verses about what God thinks of humanity. And the strongest one is the one every one of us learned in Sunday school or vacation Bible school. For God so loved the world. He didn't say for God so loved his people, for God so loved the faithful, for God so loved the believers. He said for God so loved the world. And that describes those both with him and outside of him. The world, as talking about, that's the world. He loves the people of the world. And so we don't want to say here that God's saying he made a mistake. What we're seeing of God here is the prodigal's father. He was heartbroken over what had come of his children. And he knew what he needed to do. He knew he was going to have to judge humanity.
Hey, John, how long did it take from when Adam sinned in the garden? Do you have any idea?
No idea. No idea. Because we don't really know enough of the genealogy to be able to trace it back to how it was Cain and Abel. Because dating especially in this part of the Old Testament, is near impossible. This part of the Old Testament, by the way, is called chapters 1 through 11, are called the prehistoric books. Now that doesn't mean the dinosaur books. It means before written history. Everything we have in chapter 1 through 11 came through stories. Before there was written history, these were out there, and we think, well, how can we trust them? Well, we think if it's not written down, it never happened. But if you live in a society where you've got that person in your camp, in your village, who is your village historian and everything's memorized, you know how accurate those are? Because they depend on that, and that's what they're used to. And so Moses is gleaning stories, and we don't have any idea. We can date Moses pretty well. You can date Abraham pretty well. But you can't get, once you get before Abraham, it's really hard. Some would say the earth was created in 4004 BC. The guy was a bishop by the name of Usher. That was his dating. It's a very popular one. It's in a lot of Bibles. You'll put it, at the beginning of Genesis 1, it says 4004 BC. But not all genealogies are totally complete, because genealogies have a reason. Because even the genealogy of Christ that takes us all the way back to Adam, there's a link or two that's not in there that we know should be in there. But all the links that need to be in there are in there. That's another story for another time. It doesn't mean the genealogies are wrong. It just means they accomplished what Matthew and Luke wanted them to do. So God's going to judge the world. In verse 7, I will wipe mankind whom I created. Notice he's taking ownership for this race from the face of the earth, together with the animals and the creatures that crawl and the birds of the sky. For I regret, that's that word, oh, God's so sorry, he made a mistake, that I've made them. That tells us about humanity. But then, at the end of verse 8, at verse 8, we have a point again of God's grace and mercy. However, or my translation says Noah, however. Yours might say, but Noah, or however Noah. And what that is, y'all know in English, that's a conjunction that connects. And he's saying, here's what the world was like, but God's got a plan, and there's this guy named Noah. And that word, however, is important. As is the word favor. But, okay, despite all this, but, or however, and then this word favor is as close to the word charis in the New Testament where we get grace as the Old Testament gets. God is going to show grace. And an illustration for this, Andrew, you just came in here. Do you mind, or would you do me a favor and run out to my car? I left something out there. Will you go out there and get that? Will you do that favor? Now, is he committed to doing that? No, I'm asking for a favor. He can say no, I can't get angry. Now, if I said, Andrew, I got something on the car, go get it for me right now. And he says no, then I go back down to the lawyer. Realize that God's favor is God doing something that he doesn't have to do. Now we know God is gracious, and we know that's one of the high attributes of God. It is so part of his character. But don't ever come to the point where you think God has to do something for me. Because, let's face it, if God decided this moment, and I hate doing this when I'm being recorded, if God decided in this moment that he was just going to let go of us and be wicked, what can we do to stop him? Nothing. Now we can celebrate he lives in his character and his attributes. He'll never do that because God's faithful. But when he says that Noah found favor, he found grace in God. Now, what about this world of Noah? In verses 9 through 11, first of all, we see that Noah is righteous. He is righteous before God. The word righteousness finds its root in what? What's the root word? Right. So God is right. How often is God right? All the time. Okay? He is righteous. Now, he says Noah is righteous. Notice that he doesn't say the world says that Noah's righteous. The reality is, I can look at those of you here that I know well, and I see the Christ-like attributes. I see your Christianity bubbling from you, and I can make an educated guess that you're righteous. But you know what I can't know? I can't know if you are. I can't know if any of you are. Because I can't see that part of you. Only God can. Only God can declare someone righteous. However, when he says he's also blameless, that's how you see me. That's how I see you. It's one of the, by the way, these two are part of the qualifications for being a preacher or a deacon. Right with God, blameless before others. Which means there was nothing in Noah's life that people would say, God's using him? It'd probably be more like, well, if God was going to use anyone, it'd probably be him. He was blameless. What was the world like? The world, on the other hand, in verse 11, is corrupt. It's rotten. Some of y'all have heard it. Want to hear again my illustration to describe rottenness? You like chocolate chip cookies? I would like chocolate chip cookies. It's okay, come on, I don't care if you don't have to eat them all the time. Okay, what's the best way to eat a chocolate chip cookie?
Warm out of the oven.
When you pick them up, they bend. Yeah. But if you're going to eat a hot chocolate chip cookie, what else do you have to have? What kind of milk? Cold milk. Who said cold milk? Man, try with cold milk. Yeah, I'll tell you what we do. The milk goes in a glass and goes in the freezer. Charlene then prepares the cookies, puts them in the oven. When they come out of the oven, the glasses come out of the freezer, and the glasses are skimmed over with ice because we use skimmed milk. You can't freeze whole milk very easily, too much fat in it. That's why fat people get hot and not cold. And so it's skimmed over with ice. And so you take that cookie or two.
I get bottled milk.
Milk, you like it cold? Yeah, see, she knows. Come on, lady. Cookies with cold milk. And so you take it and you eat a couple of those cookies. And, and now it's time for the greatest part. You lift up that glass, you're going to wash it down with milk so cold that you're going to crack the enamel on your teeth. You just heated them up with melted chocolate chips. And now you're going to wash it down with ice-coated milk. And you take a swig of that. And as you're swallowing, you think, should that chunk have been there? And you look at the glass and you smell it. And you dump the rotted, spoiled milk down the sink. And you cover your cookies. And you go to the other room and watch TV. The whole event has been ruined. This word
I
rotten.
haven't had a glass of milk since April of 1972.
See? That's what this word corruption describes, that kind of rottenness. It has no value. I don't care if they say they can make buttermilk out of it. Rotted meat, spoiled eggs, roadkill in the summertime. That's this word. And it says that the world had been corrupt. And by the way, this word corruption describes, as I note here, an inward condition that will play itself outward eventually. But it's an inward condition. And this is the outward condition. They become violent. And I'll tell you, when a person's rotted on the inside, that rottenness will ooze out into our actions. And it is that God is saying enough to. You see, it's not that, well, maybe I can get them to change their ways. Their hearts are rotted. They are not listening to God. How do we know they can? How do we know that God is laying a witness out for them and they ought to know better than to do this? How do we know it's possible? Help me out here. How do they know? How do we know it's possible? Not sure on that one. Okay. Noah, however, found favor with God. That's how we know it's possible. Because Noah was a righteous man. We don't know. Charlene asked a good question. I don't know how long it's been. But do you suppose the story of the garden was still out there? And the story of walking with God was still out there? And all of that? Of course it was. And they're ignoring it. Now, let's relax for a second and just do this. The numbers of the ark. It's a big boat. Have you been up to wherever it is up near Cincinnati? It is not in Ohio, it's in Kentucky. I told my Ohio friends that. This is one big boat. It's longer than a football field. It's half as wide as a football field. And it's probably about as tall as this building or a little more. This is a big boat. It has 3 decks. It will actually hold, I think, I read somewhere once, it will hold like 1.5 million cubic feet of material, which is a lot of refrigerators. 2 of every kind of animal, 7 of every clean animal. Why do they need 7 clean animals? Sacrifice. Yep, they're going to sacrifice them and they're going to eat them. On the boat, they're forewarned in the 600th year of Noah, on the 10th day in the 2nd month. They enter into the ark in the 600th year of Noah. Wait, no. No, yeah, they enter in the 600th year. They're forewarned. Oh, they're forewarned of the coming of the flood. That's what it is. It's coming. And so in the year it's coming, God says, okay, the flood is coming. He's had the building before. It takes maybe 100 years to build this, or 120. And so, you know, that's in chapter 7 as well. Chapter 7, 16, God shuts the door. That's important. It says that God closed the door. See, God's making this way of escape. And when God says, I'm sorry, it's too late, he closes it. And no one's going to open that door. The only one that can open that door is God. They exit the ark in the 601st year, in the 27th day of the 2nd month, which means they are on the ark for a year and 17 days. Now, the reason I go through all of that is chapter 8, verse 1. And you know, the ark is a type of Christ. It's a picture of Christ. It was God's plan. God provided a way for people to be saved. But they had to go God's way in God's time. And once God closes the door can't be reopened. There are no second chances after death. And so, but they're on there a long time. Look at chapter 8, verse 1. But God remembered Noah. Can you imagine what's going on in his heart and his mind? He gets on that, and then the rain starts. It's going to take a while to lift that boat. Now, we don't know how long it took to get that boat up off the ground and floating. But what do you suppose they heard on the outside? And we know they could hear from on the outside, because when it says there's a window in the top of the ark, it doesn't say there was one little tiny window. It was lined with windows. They needed ventilation. And the living quarters were probably on the top deck. You know, not on the top deck, but inside the boat. They're hearing what's going on out there. They're hearing screams. You suppose they're hearing people beating on the side? People knew where the door was. The door was where the ramp was. They're beating on it, they're screaming, and they're wanting in, and they're listening to all this. And that goes on for a while, and all of a sudden, after a while, the rain stops. And all the tumult stops. And now they're just floating. And how quiet's that going to be? And they're going to be that way for nearly 250 days, just floating. Does he know what's coming next? No. Is he wondering what's coming next? I think he is. Back in the 1980s, ABC did a movie on the Ark. It was more fanciful than Russell Crowe's because it had Lot in the story. If people who's writing movies, making movies about the Bible, just read the Bible. Lot comes during the days of Abraham. And he's floating around on his own little floating bicycle. Well, one of the things that they do good in that movie is they show Noah up on the deck, top deck. And he's looking and all he sees water. And it's not like wavy water, it's just lake water. And he sees nothing. You know, the occasional log floats by. He's been on there a long time. And he knows what happened. He was there. And they showed him almost going crazy. Now, whether he went crazy or not, who knows? But chapter 8 is a transition. But God remembered Noah, as well as everything on the ark. God had not forgotten them. Folks, sometimes you'll be on your ark and you wonder if God still knows and hears. God knows you. He's remembered you. And at that point, he begins to let the water go down. And we know the water eventually goes all the way down. And they come out of the boat. And life begins again. So let's go to that part. First of all, the result of the flood. Number one, the world is destroyed because of sin. God did the destroying. Man gave God the reason. God wouldn't have destroyed the earth if it hadn't been for sin. So it wasn't God's fault. But the world was destroyed because of sin. However, in God's grace, He gives man a brand new beginning. You know, they get off the ark. You know what's not around? There's not a bunch of mean people around. And there's not a bunch of, distractions around. He gives a brand new start. But what hasn't changed, by the way, as I mentioned, is the sin nature. But that's God's graciousness. God could have just wiped the earth and started all over and said, let's make us another Adam.
No.
I think next time I'll just call him Steve or something. Adam didn't work very well.
Hey,
Why?
he could reflect it all over again.
Yes, and that's what he's doing here, isn't it? Yes. See, even mouths of babes. She said he could fix it and start all over again. He gives us seasons. Let's read that part. Okay, let's see where I want to be. Verse 22, chapter 8. As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will not cease. He gives them seasons, and he says they'll be consistent. This is a whole new world for them. I have a friend, I got it on video, and he finally decided that maybe it didn't happen that way, but he was a scientist and Bible teacher, and the chart out in the hallway here, Dr. Poff, that's what I'm talking about. He made that chart out in the hallway. But he did a deep dive into what might have happened that caused the flood. God caused it, but how did it change the world? What was the world before, world after? But most will agree the world before was like living in the tropics. How many growing seasons in the tropics? It's constant growing season. Why? Because the temperature's right, the rain's right, the humidity's right, everything's right. And they think that was the world before the flood. And that's how things got, and also how things got so big. Most scientists will agree that the pressures were probably different. The nitrogen-oxygen mix might have been a little different. Because these guys lived forever, And plus the fossils you find. Huge leafy plants everywhere. And so now they've got seasons. Because what was Noah before he was an ark builder? He's a farmer. How do we know that? What's the first thing he plants when he gets off the boat? A vineyard. Yeah, he knew about how to grow grapes. But it's going to be different. God says, listen, there is going to be a time for you to plant, and a time for you to harvest, and it will be consistent. There will be seasons. There will be seasons where it's rainy. There will be times when it's not. It'll be consistent. And all of this, again, is part of God's grace. Because this world is totally different from them. One of my favorite results of the flood is we got to eat meat. Chapter 9, verse 3. He says, every creature that lives and moves will be food for you. I ain't eating snakes or anything like that. But I do like a cow. I like pork. I like all those. I love what Jesus said. And in saying this, Jesus declared all food clean. But we became meat eaters. We were vegetarians. I don't know. Maybe we were vegans. But before the flood, God says, I'm giving you all of the plants and the animals. You eat the plants, you enjoy the animals. Well, afterwards, I'm putting the fear of you and the animals. You can eat them now. Different way. But in this, he emphasizes the sacredness of life. In verse 6, let me back up and catch a little bit at the end of verse 5. It says, I will require a penalty for your lifeblood. I will require it from any animal and from any human. If someone murders a fellow human, I will require that person's life. Whoever sheds human blood, by humans his blood will be shed. For God made man in his likeness, or in his image. Now, notice he says, he also makes he puts animals in the count. You catch that? If an animal frivolously takes the life of a person, that animal's got to die. What do we do with an animal that does that? You kill him. You put him down. Dog attacks you, bites you, put him down. Why? Because they want to do it again. God said, no, take care of those animals. But also, and this was probably the world before the ark, also, if someone murders another person. And when it says here that the word murder that's used there, that is the frivolous taking of life for the betterment of the person who does it. This isn't accidental. This isn't, and God makes provision for this in Leviticus. He says you're out in the woods, you're cutting trees down, the axe head flies off, hits someone, kills them. Now, before God made the rule, the kinsman redeemer, my family's coming and killing you because you killed me. But it was an accident. It's not murder. This word murder says, I took your life because I either just really, really hated you, or I gained something from it. I killed you and took your stuff. That's murder. It's not talking about murder in war. As long as the murder in war is based on the rules of war. Now, I just can't go into a community and gun everybody down. And I don't kill surrendering soldiers. But if I'm in the midst of battle, and anyone's shooting at me, I can shoot them. That's not murder. Hebrews had another word for that. This word talks about what we talk about with murder. This doesn't even, I don't think even counts when it's a murder or a death that happens that shouldn't have happened because maybe drunk driving. But that should have a heavier penalty because I did do something that caused that. But I didn't get in my car with the intent to do that. So, in prison, absolutely. Death penalty, absolutely not. So that's what God's talking about here. And when he wants, he's not giving us guidelines on when it's okay to kill. He's just saying don't kill. Don't murder. Life is sacred. And then God makes a covenant with man. What's the covenant? It's the rainbow. We'll put the bow in the sky. Let's read a little bit about that. Verse 8 of chapter 9. Then God said to Noah and his sons with him, understand that I am establishing my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, birds, livestock, all the wildlife on the earth that are with you, all the animals on the earth that came out of the ark. I establish my covenant with you that never again will every creature be wiped out by floodwaters. There will never again be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant I am making between me and you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations. I have placed my bow in the clouds, and it will be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I form clouds over the earth, and the bow appears in the clouds, I'll remember my covenant between me and you and all living creatures. Water will never again become a flood to destroy every creature. The bow will be in the clouds, and I will look at it, and I will remember the permanent covenant between God and all living creatures on earth. God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and every creature. So, big question is, what God put the rainbow up there for? We're going to go there too. Yeah. Yeah.
The animal will shelter from what?
They do.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll make sure that happens.
Yeah.
Noah's sitting out, leaning against a tree. They're in the mountains of Ararat, so he's not seeing all the sky. He just sees what's coming over the mountain. Here comes a big black cloud. Last time he saw one of those. Yeah. And then he looks up at the ark. And Who knows how they got out of it? Some say that broke his way out, busted the door down. Who knows? But he's looking up that ark. All the animals have fled. Clouds come over the mountain. He looks at Shem, Ham, and Japheth and said, "You got to round the animals back up. Here comes another rain." Yeah, I mean, can you imagine first time it rained? They had never experienced rain because, before the flood, there was no rain. It's not how God watered the earth. There was a mist, a heavy fog, heavy dew. And that, so God put the rainbow up there. Which then comes back to the question, why did God put the rainbow up there? For who to remember his covenant? For God to remember his covenant. I like that on the test too. I get them every time. I get something on it every time. You read through here quickly, carefully, 3 times God says, "I'm putting your bow in the sky, so when I see it, I'll remember the covenant." See, it doesn't matter if I see it and remember the covenant. What matters is that God remembers. Now, we know that God never forgets. But again, he is speaking in ways that we understand. God's saying, listen, no, when that cloud comes over and that rainbow shows up, just know, I see that, and I am not going to destroy the world through a flood. Because who was the one who destroyed the world with a flood? It was God. And God says, I just want you to know that I know I will never do that again. And again, as I say, we know that God does not forget. But he's saying that for our benefit. I want you to know that I remember. Because sometimes we wonder if God does. And so he puts the bow in the sky. I was talking with a friend at school the other day and looking at that whole idea of the bow, the hunter's bow or the archer or the warrior's bow. And when the warrior was done with the battle, he hung the bow up. That way, it was no threat to anyone. And so some would say that's why it's a rainbow, because it's in the shape of a bow. And I like that. But I also know that, that rainbow shows up all the time. And God's saying, I'm not going to destroy the world with a flood anymore. How's he doing it next time? He's going to burn it up. Because, see, the first judgment was not a permanent judgment. It was a restart. It was a do-over. The next destruction is the wrath of God that brings an end to his first creation. And then we get the new creation. One more thing in this, and that is we need to understand that the sin nature was not erased. Okay? Look at chapter 9, verse 20. We've talked about this already a little bit. But he says in verse 20, Noah, a man of the soil, began planting a vineyard. And he drank some of the wine. Now, this is going to take some time. They got to grow. They've got to get up there. But evidently, he knew how to make it before he got on the boat. And wine in that day wasn't a big deal because water was. But they also, and most people who study this stuff, not just Bible people, but anthropologists, people who study civilizations, they will easily attest that most of the wine that was made, even in Jesus' day, was a wine that probably had an alcohol content of less than 2%. Because it doesn't take much alcohol in grape juice to keep it from spoiling. And how often do you harvest grapes? Once a year, so it's got to last a whole year. And I discovered this at Harlan. We've discovered it in our fridges before. You know how long Welch's grape juice will last in a fridge? I'll tell you, sometime you'll be pouring it out, and I don't know if we can use this for Lord's Supper or not. And so, that was the whole purpose of it. However, they did know you could increase the level. And I don't know. I do know this, when you see those things for hard cider and those fruit-flavored alcoholic drinks that they have out there, like marketing them towards kids or something, if you read the small print, most of those are 5%. Now, we all kind of grew up about the same time. And I remember in high school, and I was never a beer drinker, it's nasty, you can drink that stuff anyway. But most beer was, we called it, the kids called it 3.2 beer, 3.2% alcohol. The really hard beer was 6.4. Well now, man, they're putting out hard cider that's just, and these seltzers, these flavored seltzers, is 5% alcohol. And you know what that's for? That's to buzz you.
I heard a segment on the alcohol that didn't start until like about 100 years ago. Was it before that? It wasn't that as much.
Yeah. That's why 100 years ago, Baptists didn't care about drinking wine. Because there's almost no alcohol in it. But now, and wine is really evidently heavily alcoholed. Because the whole thing is, I just do it to relax. Drinking grape juice will not relax you. It always hyped our kids. But the alcohol will. So, that comes to play here. He plants a vineyard, he makes wine, he gets wasted. He is so drunk that he goes in his tent and he flops down naked. And you gotta understand the culture, it's not much different from our culture today. I mean, do you ever have those dreams that you get to work and find out you forgot to put your pants on? And you're just embarrassed. And for these folks to be seen naked was just the epitome of humiliation and dishonor. And so Ham goes in, Canaan goes in there. No, it is Ham. Ham goes in there and sees his dad wasted, laying in all his glory. And comes out and he laughs about it. It says, verse 20, Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father naked and went and told his brothers outside. And it probably was, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? Dad's naked and drunk in there. What are we going to do? You probably not, you got to go and see Dad. This is a 600 plus year old man. Yeah. See, I need her in church. She'll amen me. But what Shem and Japheth do is they honor him by walking backwards. They can't see him and cover him. Now, and then when it's all done, Noah finds out about it and gets really upset. He is so upset. Any grandparents in here? When your kids make you mad, you want to take it out on your grandkids? No. But he's going to. Why does that work this way? He gets up, he wakes from drinking, learned what the youngest son had done to him, and he says in verse 25, Canaan is cursed. He will be the lowest of slaves to his brothers. He also said, blessed be the Lord God of Shem. Let Canaan be Shem's slave. Let God extend Japheth. Let Japheth dwell in the tents of Shem. Let Canaan be Shem's slaves. Ham was the one who did the deed. Why Canaan? Probably because Noah knew that trait's going to be passed on. And so he curses Canaan. Now some say the curse was he put the curse on Ham, and that is why a certain ethnic group can be enslaved. Because the word Ham means black. However, he didn't curse Ham. He cursed Canaan. So that's stupid. But those are things that have been used in our history, the church's history in the United States, to legitimize some of this stuff. It's just a misreading of the scripture. What we do see is the sin nature is still abounding. Now, I think I already did this one. Here's some blanks to fill in. I don't know why this one's out of order. It should have been before it. But in case you want to fill in those blanks and go in that, I'll leave that up there. And we'll get to some lessons. And then, if you so desire, in 15 minutes, we can be done after this because I can get through the Tower of Babel in less than 15 minutes. And that covers our whole thing. Which just means for Sunday school, I have to study my Sunday school lesson for tomorrow instead of doing this. But again, the need for the rainbow. My wife loves rainbows. She cries with rainbows. Do you remember, it was about a couple months ago, or maybe a little longer, the big one in Middlesboro? I mean, it made it on everyone's Facebook page, you know. And we sat in McDonald's parking lot and watched it. It was amazing. We pulled out a line because the line was going too slow and too long. We just pulled over and watched. It was an amazing rainbow. But let it be a reminder, and people have asked, well, you know, what do we do with the group that stole the rainbow from us? Look at their rainbow, it's not the same one. It's not the same rainbow. It really isn't. That rainbow came from the Rainbow Coalition, from Jesse Jackson, and not from Noah's rainbow, or God's rainbow. It doesn't have the right colors. I think it has too many colors. So they didn't steal it from us. Okay, lessons. Okay, let's do 4 this time. Sin grieves God. Sin is punished. Number 3 is the big one. God gave humanity a way to escape sin, but they had to go God's way at God's time. Paul writes, today is the day of salvation. We don't put it off when the Holy Spirit's saying, you really need to get saved. We also see that God can use anyone. Many of y'all in my Sunday school class, I've got, it's a senior adult class. I don't really fit in, I'm way too young. I told them I finally made it into senior adulthood. I wear hearing aids now. But God used a 600-year-old man. So guess what, folks? Ain't no one in here time to retire. There's work to be done in our churches. It doesn't matter how old you are. God can use you, and God wants to. We also see that God will not forget us in our time of need, but God remembered Noah. We found that God values all life. You know why, as Christians, do we take a strong stand for pro-life? Because God's pro-life. All life is precious to God. We're all made in the likeness and image of God. We also know that God keeps his promises. And I'll tell you, if there is one attribute of God that we ought to jump up and down and celebrate, is that he is a promise keeper. He is a promise keeper. Now, is it okay? Can I go on? Okay. It won't take long. Besides, there's more biscuits over there. Huh? Yeah, I know we're all done. We don't have to do anything because this is kind of how Sunday school is set up anyway, so we don't have to touch the room. The Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel is a fun one, isn't it? First of all, where did it take place? It took place in the plains of Shinar. I put a couple of maps, you probably can't see them up there. Where the circle is, that is where it is thought that is Baghdad, modern day Baghdad. And the tower, in the plains of Shinar is where the city of Babylon was eventually built, which is just outside of Baghdad. And archaeologists have found it. They've actually done a little bit of digging, found one of the gates, I think. And so, you know, it's a real place. It's near modern Baghdad. Now, the story is a very short one. The whole earth had the same language and vocabulary. As people migrated from the east, they found a valley in the land of Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, come, let's make oven-fired bricks. They used bricks for stone and asphalt for mortar. And they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the sky. Let us make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered throughout the earth. Then the Lord came down to look over the city and the tower that the humans were building, that man was building. And then the Lord said, they have begun to do this as one people, all having the same language, that nothing they plan will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language, so they will not understand one another's speech. So from there, the Lord scattered them throughout the earth, and they stopped building the city. Therefore, it is called Babylon, after Babel, which means confusion. So, first of all, the sin of Babel. What is the first sin of Babel? What's it say in verse 4?
They decided to build the city, to reach them together.
Keep going.
And they didn't ask permission from God.
And what was their purpose for building it?
So they would not be separated.
Make a name for themselves. And a pride. We want to make a name for ourselves. Now, the picture in your book, it might have looked like that. It was called a ziggurat. That's the only way they're going to make one as big as they're going to make it. It's like the Incas and the Aztecs down in the lower Americas. And those are common around the world. But their thing is we're going to build this to the sky. We're going to go where God lives. Ask anybody where God lives who maybe believes in God, and where are they going to point? Where's hell? They're going to point down. So they're going to reach, what they're saying is, we're going to reach God. We're going to make a name for ourselves. We're not going to scatter out, which is their second sin, and that's disobedience. Because God told Noah when he got off the ark, he gave Noah the same command he gave Adam. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. They decided they weren't, and he took to Noah. Now get off the boat. Now what you need to do is you need to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Well, this group decided they didn't want to do that. They're hanging together. No one's separating us. That's disobedience to God. Is this enough for God to do something? I think. It says that God noticed their activity. It's the idea he came down to see. Like when he went and met Abraham. When he's going to send a couple angels to Sodom and Gomorrah to rescue Lot. It says God came down. He said, they came down to see if everything I heard about Sodom and Gomorrah is as bad as it sounds. Does God know how bad it is? He doesn't have to come down. That's for our benefit. It shows that God interacts with us. And so God came down and he observed their activity. And note that he says that he's not going to let them go along the same route they went before the flood. The Lord said if they have begun to do this as one people having all the same language, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Every inclination of the human heart is always evil all the time. And God said, we're not going down that road again. And so, in his amazing creativity, he creates different languages that forced a separation. Anyone here travel internationally? Yeah, isn't it kind of nice when you get to an airport and you hear English? Yeah, it just kind of draws you. And you can, use that divine imagination that the Lord gives each of us. He's part of being made in his likeness and image. You're working on this tower. And my job is I'm laying bricks. My son's job, because he's younger and stronger, is he has to bring me bricks. And so we're working along, and we have to pretend he's not my son, because I don't think God separated families like that. But, so let's just say he's my worker. He's my helper. And I said, hey, Drew, I need you to go down and get more bricks. Be right back. Runs down, picks him up another, however they bring him up, a pallet of bricks. And he's coming up there, and he doesn't notice anything really weird. And he gets up there and he says, hey, John, I got your bricks for you. Where do you want me to put them? And I'm just working away. And he says, John, I got your bricks. Where do you want them? And I just keep waiting. Why is he ignoring me? Kicks me. Hey, where do you want the bricks? I'm looking at him and he says, where do you want the bricks? And I'm hearing him say, yibbity, yibbity, yibbity. And I said, what? And he hears, what? I said, what are you saying? And he hears, blah, 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 blah. And both of us are thinking, I'm getting away from this crazy guy. But somewhere down the line, I hear someone say, how come you are saying silly things? I don't understand what you're saying, but I understand what he said. What am I going to do? Yeah.
Why in chapter 10, I think it's in chapter 10 around verse 5, I think, where it says that all the families were together and they all had their own language.
Mm-hmm.
How is that?
Yeah, because number 10 is a genealogy. And so the genealogy spreads over time. This is a story inserted. It's like Ruth. When you read the whole book of Judges, and then the next book is Ruth. And it says, in the day the judges judged, and then it takes you back into the book of Judges. That's what that's about. Yeah, it's a good question, though, because it can be really confusing. Wait, where did the languages come from? Somewhere after this, talking about how that in the family, that's why I know God didn't separate families. One story, and I'll put one more blank up there. I had one of the blessings of being at the school is I've had a lot of chance to travel for the school. And for 5 years, we had a partnership in Russia teaching pastors. And we would go 3 weeks at a time. on these. So when I had my teaching assignment, which was generally the end of September, I would go for 3 weeks and teach. Well, one year, we had a professor that couldn't go, actually he wouldn't go, he's a cowardly rabbit. And we were going to a different place up near the Arctic Circle called Arkhangelsk. And it's where the sub bases are. And you're not allowed to wander around out there. And so I'm up there and I spent 3 weeks. It was a terrible school. The students really didn't want to be there. They were being paid to be there. I mean, who wouldn't do it then? And they really didn't want it. And I had some guys that all they wanted to do was argue. And so it was time to go finally. I'd spent about almost 13 days, 14 days with the pastor and his family. And his 10-year-old son knew 10 words of English. One of them was, "Hey, man." I remember he even said, "Hey, dude." And he liked Starsky and Hutch. And anyway, so I'm getting ready to go, and I go back to the airport. He takes me to the airport, Arkhangelsk, which the waiting area that I sat in was like as big as where we did our thing yesterday evening, but pulled the curtain that much. And waiting for that plane to take off. It was March. It was miserable, and I just wanted to go home. I just want to hear English again, because my translators were members of that family, but didn't live in that apartment. They would leave and come the next morning. And so I would talk to a 10-year-old with his 10 words. His wife understood nothing. The pastor's wife understood nothing. And the pastor who was never home. And so I just sit and watch the Chechen war on TV and try to figure out what was going on in Russia. So I'm sitting in the airport in Arkhangelsk, and I'm just homesick. I cannot wait to get back to St. Petersburg, where I can catch my international flight home. And so I'm sitting there, all bundled up in my coat, and I hear someone say, "Now, what do y'all think about your trip?" And I thought, he's a Texan. Too many years in seminary in Texas. And so I listened again and heard, and I got up, and there happened to be an empty seat beside me, so I sat down beside him, and he kept rattling on. And finally I nudged him and said, "How long you been here?" Scared him to death. He said, "You're an American." I said, "You're a Texan." "Yes, I am." And they had done a school trip from one of the colleges in Texas over to Arkhangelsk for some reason. But just to hear my language, migrated toward that language. God wasn't being cruel. But he was going to say, if you need a little help doing the work that I gave you to do, I'll help you. Now, this would have been odd, but that's how the languages came to be. And so what happened is God scattered them. God's going to scatter his people another time, because they weren't doing exactly what he wanted them to do. I'm not talking about the Babylonian exile. I'm talking about the persecution in Jerusalem in the New Testament days. You get that early in the book of Acts. All of a sudden, it's the time of Paul, when Saul. And a persecution arises in the area, and the church scatters. And most theologians will say that was a God act. Because God told them, Jesus told them, go into all the world and make disciples. And they're all sitting in Jerusalem. So what's he do? He gets a persecution going, or he allows a persecution to happen. And they all scatter, and all of a sudden, you got churches all over the place. You got churches being planted in Samaria. You got the church at Antioch, which sent out the first missionaries. And they're all being, and that's probably was God scattering them. Because God said go, and they were kind of slow to go. But God will help us to go when we're supposed to go. Lesson 1. Pride is the root sin of all sin, and it always precedes the fall. Pride cometh before destruction, and a haughty spirit before the fall. And that is the books of stories that were written before people were writing histories. They were just repeating histories. And why this is the most important thing we have is the attack against Christianity in the world and against the church in the world today is attack against the first 2 chapters and a pushback against the 3rd chapter. The first 2 chapters say that God did create. It just didn't happen. And if God created, then he is sovereign over it. We're accountable to him. You've seen the old bumper sticker, God said it, I believe it, that settles it. And then someone fixed it, God settled it, God said it, that settles it, whether I believe it or not. And so we've got to have Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2, because if we're not careful, we'll look like an illustration I saw once in a publication. There's two castles and a deep valley in between, and these are sitting on top of the mountaintops. And they got cannons on the walls. And they're shooting cannonballs at each other. Now the cannon on this side is the cannon of the world. And above the cannon of the world are things, the castle of the world are things like pornography, abortion, immorality, the different sins, drunkenness. And the kingdom over here, the castle over here, the flag on the top of that castle has a cross on it. So this is the castle of the church. And what the castle of the church is shooting at is the balloons. They're trying to pop the balloons. The castle of the world is shooting at the foundation. And on the foundation is written creation. And what the world's trying to do is destroy the creation account, because if they can destroy the creation account in the minds of people, then it destroys, they think, the sovereignty of God. And what the church sometimes does that we need to keep doing, but not only, is we shoot at symptoms. And the foundation of the world is the word sin. We shoot at sins. When the answer is getting the word out that sin can be forgiven and we can be saved. Until that is killed in a person's life, all these balloons are going to keep floating up there. So as a church, we hold to creation because creation tells us God did it, He owns it, He makes the rules. And we serve a creator God who so loves the world. So that's why these books are so important. More than just, well, they're in there. They explain where things came from. And understand until God intervenes, the world just gets worse and worse and worse. But God does intervene, and He did it. He intervened once with the ark, but that wasn't a permanent fix. He intervened another time with the law of the covenant in the temple. And that wasn't meant to be a permanent fix either. God didn't fail in both of those times. Oh, I thought that would work. No. The permanent fix is Christ. He's just getting us ready to that point. So that's the study. Thank you all for coming. Any other comments?